What is going on, everybody? We are here live with a late night edition, a WrestleMania week late night edition of the Republic Ramble. Whoops. Wrestling Republic's daily broadcast. Just kidding. Kobe Galanzowski's back. You're kidding me. He's been gone for over a month now. A month and 2 days. We've got super producer physically in the building. I know I say that often, like in reference to Kobe's in the building for the show. No. Like we're actually in the same house, just in separate rooms. We had to do a whole setup. It's a long story. Camera cuts, the whole nine. We've also flew in yesterday all the way from Philly. Head of opinions, Anthony Ricciardi. We've got a fun show tonight. We had you guys will love this. Hopefully, if you are flying out for WrestleMania, just a heads up, LAX is a nightmare. It is not looking good down there. Thank goodness, me and Anthony, as my co-pilot down there, we grinded it out after 3 laps, 2 hours, and a quarter tank of gas. We managed to find Kobe at one of the pillars in Terminal 3 because basically you can't park on the premises right now with the construction. And for a week like this, where we got 40,000 wrestling fans flying in from out of town over the next few days, that's something to keep in mind. And now I will say also, I picked up Anthony yesterday from John Wayne in Orange County. That was a breeze. Took about 15 minutes. In, out, on with our lives. It was excellent. But more importantly than that, let's get on to the show. And let's start with Kobe. You ready? You want to get into AEW right away since we're fresh off of it? It's a late night show for the first time in all of our careers. Do we immediately get into, I'm going to even give you a little, free reign here. Do we immediately get into the Danielson heel turn? Or do we start with the way it started? You tell me. Where do you want to go?
Ultimately, we can go with the idea that, we can think about how Kenny Omega, this is his first championship defense for the IWGP United States Championship, and it's on a Dynamite. So overall, it's interesting, but I'm not going to be the one person who says, "Oh, I knew he was champion the whole time." He hasn't been. I don't want to say he hasn't been a fighting champion, but it definitely has felt like the championship itself has taken the step back and has taken kind of a supportive role to the Kenny Omega character and position he is in on the AEW television product that we have.
So are you saying that Kenny's has, you don't feel like this singles run post the Bucks and what happened with the AAA or AAA champion Vikingo like a week ago, and then now adding Jeff Cobb to the list, and maybe Danielson isn't telling about a potential singles run for Brian? I'm sorry, for Kenny. Maybe alongside Callis again. Bring back the cleaner.
I wouldn't say it's not telling if we had to go that direction, but it's interesting that almost now it's taking shape because we saw Wrestle Kingdom, and then it was like we saw the championship on the shoulders, and it was pretty much right around the Escalar. I don't want to botch the name, but the trios ladder match that they did have in January at the LA Forum, and it was almost like he showed up with it once, and there was not another instant where he kind of didn't have that championship again. Or a lot of people, I feel like outside of knowing he was the champion, it was very much forgettable, and he's in the position of, yes, he was just trios champion. Yes, this is kind of now like, okay, he just had his quote unquote dream match with Vikingo, the match that was supposed to happen before he ended up relinquishing the AAA Mega Championship. And then there, of course, is just the one that we had tonight, which was him and Jeff Cobb. Of course, Kenny Omega does in fact retain. But the one question I do have, and this is kind of like the situation they've put themselves in, aside
Wait,
from
Kobe, no questions yet. We'll take questions later. Anthony, I want to get your thoughts on the potential Omega singles run alongside Callis, similar to the run he had in AEW recently, where he held the title. Now he's got 2 wins against former champions. Do you foresee this as a tease for him going back to maybe even a cleaner type gimmick or something like that, or do you see it as a broader part of the Elite storyline? And what are your thoughts as a whole?
I mean, the thing is, and I think you and I discussed this, Clark, when it happened. I was not a big fan of Kenny beating Ospreay because I kind of felt that Ospreay was loyal to New Japan. I know New Japan was not a fan of when Kenny left and felt like he betrayed them. So, and I think the conversation I had with you went, well, he'll be able to promote the New Japan US title on AEW TV. And I agree with you that I can understand that logic, but as a whole, he was rarely ever on AEW TV with the title, to the point where when they announced this match, I said to you, I forgot he even had the damn thing because it was like he never had it. So could this be another relaunch to a dominant singles career for him in AEW? I mean, it's possible, but at the same point, I don't know how much you trust Callis these days, because it seems like he's doing something behind the scenes based on what happened last week with the whole Hangman thing. And just as a whole, I don't know how successful Kenny's collector of world titles really was the last time. I don't really think it did much for Impact when he had it, and because he never really lost either title cleanly. The AAA he had to vacate due to injury, and the Impact one, he didn't even lose it in Impact. He lost it by, a non-clean finish to Christian. Like, he never actually lost the title cleanly. So I don't know how successful that run was. I mean, if you look at Impact's ratings, they actually went down when Kenny was champion, which really shouldn't make sense, but the numbers are the numbers. So
for sure. And I totally, and I'm in a lot of agreement, but I do want to say myself, I do find it interesting, especially where you're coming from, because I want to kind of add to this and get your thoughts too, both of you guys on this. Because I agree with what you're saying, and especially at the time, that was kind of the narrative that was discussed often, with wrestling fans and pundits. And I'm not even saying IWC. I'm just saying, like, we talked about it, like, what's it doing for all the companies, right? Like, it was a topic of conversation without question. But I would also argue as a I like AEW, I really do, as a fan, and I would say a lot of AEW fans that I kind of see maybe at the time would have said the same things that we did. And oddly enough, I feel like that Kenny's singles run as champion is looked upon more fondly now, given some time between, than it was immediately. And it's funny because in hindsight, I go, it didn't help Impact, except for that I paid more attention to Impact during that exact time than I would have. And I was like, and I couldn't have been the only one. I'm not saying it gave him a big boost. The ratings tell the truth. But on paper, in theory, and even if it takes a hardcore fan like me to make sure and go, like, wait a minute, because I'm not saying that I don't really like Impact. I think it's amazing, but I am more casual on Impact than I think I should be even now, because I've watched quite a bit more this year than I would say in the last year and a half prior, and didn't really understand the level of storytelling they were having. I think what threw me was how late to the party they were on having fans back. That just threw me for a loop, in all honesty, and that's not fair to them, right? That's, I don't mean that negatively. I'm just trying to be honest there, right? About my own bias in that regard. But at the end of the day, I think I think while it didn't benefit it in the short term, given the ratings, I do think in the long run, it's a run that's looked upon more fondly than I expected. And even the Christian aspect of it, and Christian being able to be the one to retire that belt, who I think was rightful, which is kind of what came out of the Kenny storyline, and a lot of people overlook. A lot of good came out of that story, as much as there was bad. Right? I'm not,
Yeah.
You nailed it on the head. And at the time, I would have said not just the exact same thing. I wouldn't have even gone on this. I would have been like, yep, I agree. That's what happened. But in hindsight, it's kind of like, it was maybe better than I thought, like in a few spots, especially the way they made the Christian Kenny main event matter more than we kind of, it was trash at the time, like on paper, but then realistically we got there, and yeah, it wasn't like a 5-star, but Christian getting the pinfall victory over Kenny on Dynamite played perfectly. And I wonder if that's where
Rampage.
I'm sorry, Rampage. Thank you. But the other AEW show, but the funniest part to me is I'm wondering if that played a factor in, and I don't want to get off on like a big old tangent, but this is the Tangents crew. And so I wonder if it played a factor in playing hot potato with CM Punk and Moxley before All Out the very next year, because of the way that I think it was fondly looked upon in hindsight. The Christian getting the win, the difference being there's not 2 belts. So now you're playing hot potato with the 1 belt that matters. And I'm wondering if that was just like somehow overlooked in an afterthought. I don't know, man. That's probably a topic for another time, but they just seem too similar, and how close they were to both pay-per-view events is telling to me in some ways.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the things at the time after Kenny's run with the Impact title. I had written a piece that essentially, just the presentation wise, I really didn't think Impact really benefited as much, because I felt like on Impact TV, Tony Khan was appearing with Tony Schiavone with like infomercials, and they were like burying Impact on Impact and promoting Dynamite, which at the time was airing the next night. And it was almost like Impact became Sunday Night Heat from back in the day, promoting Raw. Like, that's what it felt like. And I did not expect the ratings to trend down. Like, I had no idea that was a thing. I just happened to look at the ratings when I was writing the piece, and I went, "Now this can't be right. The ratings can't be going down." And they were. It was very bizarre. I did not expect that. I think Christian worked tremendously because obviously he had history in the company. He was a former world champion there. It made it a lot easier for them, for Kenny to lose the title, but not necessarily lose it to somebody in Impact, which I think was a concern for them. They want Kenny to look as strong as possible. I think that's the kind of the thing. The only thing I would have done differently is I was fine with Christian fighting him for the AEW title at All Out. Probably one of the best pay-per-views that's ever been done by any company, because that was All Out 21. So the only thing I would have done different is, yes, it would have had Christian took the Impact title from him. I would have done, even though Christian, I think, worked an Impact event the same weekend, AAA had the Triple Mania, which Kenny was defending the title, the Mega Championship against Andrade, who's also an AEW guy. I would have done, if Christian couldn't appear on the AAA show, I would have had a moment where Christian's music hit and distracted Kenny and cost them the AAA championship, because then you could have then argued, I took 2 of your 3 world titles. I'm taking your final one at All Out. I think that would have added something to it, and it at least would have gotten the belts off of Kenny cleanly. Well, not necessarily cleanly, but like protected as best you could. And I think it would have added something to that main event. Instead, okay, he dropped one of the titles to Christian, and the other one he had to vacate. So like AAA really never got the benefit from that Kenny reign either. So I feel like Kenny and AEW benefited more from the partnerships than the other companies really did. That was my only issue with it. The Kenny
that makes perfect sense. I agree with you on. I would actually argue, though. I mean, Don Callis did. I wonder if he really lost his job or wanted to leave Impact. But the irony on that spot is funny to me. Not lost on me, but I do feel bad also, Anthony. Kobe has been waiting to get after the end of what his statement was on this one, and I'm like, Kobe, you gotta go too.
Go for it, Kobe.
But because we could go forever on that one.
100%. And I mean, that's the thing. Like, I agree with both sides of the story and both sides of the coin in this situation. But this is also applicable to anything we can name of, we can start, we can take anything in the history of wrestling and say, oh, these had good qualities. At the end of the day, the biggest thing with that entire singles championship run was the fact that it was supposed to be a belt collector gimmick that storyline wise did not end correctly, because we just had the one championship loss on AEW Rampage, which is interesting, saying, hey, let's do Christian versus Kenny on TV before they go to All Out and do it again. That's an interesting move in itself, but at the end of the day, that happened. Then whatever politics ended up taking place didn't let Kenny Omega lose the AAA Mega Championship to Andrade when Ric Flair was in the building. Makes no sense to me. All Out wins. I'll give credit where credit is due. They made the moment, and the whole Matt Jackson giving the nod for the Buckshot Lariat. They gave a moment, and it is going to be one that is remembered in AEW history, in Hangman beating Kenny Omega for the championship. But overall, when I'm thinking of the belt collector gimmick and the storyline and overall his championship reign that he had, I don't think it was done correctly. I don't think it was done poorly. We can go either way. Impact. The only thing I can say Impact might have gained is I think it was Rebellion and Slammiversary both had pretty high buy rates, which take that for what you will. But like you said, they were on Impact TV bearing the company, essentially. Overall, like, there's a lot of ways we can look at this. I almost want to say they did it the right way with FTR, because we saw FTR, well, they lost the Ring of Honor belts, then they lost the AAA, then they lost the IWGP. And yes, you can think about it. They, although they weren't in credit, like the most important tag team in AEW, despite having other companies' championships, at least they kind of did it in a way of like, well, the belt collector's gimmick has to end somehow. The castle has to crash down and crumble down almost simultaneously. And I think it was more effectively done with FTR.
I love where you're going, Kobe, too, with that. That actually, it does make a lot of sense. And what you're saying about FTR makes a lot of sense. Now I'll ask this, though, because earlier we discussed, you wanted to make a point about the Danielson heel turn, as well as the Kenny Omega situation, and how this all played out on Dynamite tonight, and how it relates to the House of Black Trios Championship picture. So before we move on to our next topic, which will be NXT, essentially, we're running low. Although at the same time, to be honest, we actually might cut the show a little short of 45, because the UK boys are going to touch down just about the top of the hour at LAX, and I might have to take a phone call. So if that's the case, we might cut this at like 38 minutes. To be totally honest, I'm just going to be honest to the audience. If you're hanging in there with us, that's the case. We got to get those guys. We got to get those guys here.
If you have to step out, you can.
It's Mania weekend. Maybe, yeah, I guess you guys can hang and you can.
You guys will get a lot of
content this week. But I just wanted to give the heads up. But I knew you wanted to bring that up, Kobe, so I didn't want to muddle along and miss out on that. So let us know.
Yeah. So it's come to my attention, and yes, we are on the West Coast right now, so Dynamite's not aired. So I'm going off of Twitter. I'm going off of what I can find on social media and being what's being said. So to my knowledge, after the Kenneth Omega versus Jeff Cobb match, Kenny retains. We had I want to say a brawl of some sort, or in this case, it was a heel turn. So Daniel Bryan, formerly known as Daniel Bryan, now Bryan Danielson, he had given the big bazooka knee to Kenny Omega. He is effectively joining the Blackpool Combat Club, and they are going heel.
Rejoining.
They are very much building towards some form of either just another Anarchy in the Arena match between them, a Stadium Stampede if they attempt to do that one again, who knows, or just or a Blood and Guts. We are going to get some form of faction versus faction, the Elite and Hangman Page versus the Blackpool Combat Club. And what I want to say, and I don't want to say this is the problem with the Elite, but this is the problem I have with kind of the direction they're going. Is we just saw at AEW Revolution, which, of course, if you didn't know, it's been a few weeks, but the House of Black had successfully won the championships from the Elite. They're kind of doing stuff with like the JAS, like they were. I think Brody King and Garcia beat Brody King, and I think Brody King had another match with Jay Hager, and now Anna Jay is going after Julia Hart. At the end of the day, that whole trios championships is kind of feeling undervalued. And to me, I don't want to say that's a mistake, but I think it's a puzzling situation as despite we do this big series for the trios championships with the Elite and the Death Triangle, then they kind of have, I guess, a month, almost just short of 2 months long of a reign. And then it's like, okay, well, they're moving on from those championships and almost I don't want to say the pressure, but they're almost saying, well, they moved on from these championships. These championships aren't going to be the main priority. And I think it's very much shaping up to be some sort of that way, because as we can see on a weekly basis, we're getting Elite and Hangman Page teases. They're continuing the Blackpool Combat Club feud with Hangman, and obviously the Elite has now been in this.
You got to keep them all in the picture, though, by the way. I like where you're going with this, but I didn't want to fully cut you off there, but you got to keep them all in the picture, right, Kobe? It's one of those things where I do think, because I think you were onto something there, and I didn't want to cut you off, but I wanted to also add to your point in a sense. AEW, I think, has an issue with where a faction will gain short-term steam, right? Or a group, whether it's trios or an entire faction, even a tag team for that matter, will gain short-term steam. And I think, and if we're going to point to the positives, on the opposite side, you have the Acclaimed, you even to an extent have, the short-lived Dark Order run on the way to All Out worked with Hangman at that time, right? In a trio sense. The what is the name? Anthony, please help me on this. The MJF one, the Pinnacle. Thank you. The Pinnacle worked for 3 weeks brilliantly, and then there was no end. It was a book with no ending. And
you're talking about the Firm was the other one.
And the Firm as well. You can add the Firm to the list. So there's been positives. I would argue that the Inner Circle was a success for the company, for the individuals, not necessarily. It wasn't what they thought it was, but I do believe that the Inner Circle's viewed fondly in hindsight. They were very entertaining as a group. And did a really good job, but I believe it's a crux that AEW needs to be careful navigating, is getting too faction happy, Thankfully, they haven't done the super faction like NWO style, where you end up with like, you're actually
Everyone's in.
you're not entirely sure who's on the team.
Yeah.
Right? You're like, wait a minute, is half the locker room in the group? Like that
Yeah.
seems unfair.
Mm-hmm.
And wrestling usually should be unfair in spots. That's part of what makes good storytelling. But yeah, thankfully they haven't done that. But it does seem to be a lot of stop-start type booking.
Yeah.
Which now, in fairness, an injury caused the firm thing. I would argue the Jericho Appreciation Society, I don't know what to make of that ending because Santana Ortiz, I believe, when healthy and on the same page and firing on all cylinders, in my personal opinion, are a top 5 tag team on this planet every day of their lives. They're both so talented in the ring. I thought Ortiz borderline stole, speaking of stadium stampedes, shout out to Kobe for mentioning that one. Ortiz's cell on the bell ringing, when they rang the bell at the top of the stadium and he put his head in the bell and the cell job falling into the pool then, but dragging Matt Hardy with him as his head's shaking. And then Hardy it's one of my favorites. It's hilarious. And Ortiz doesn't get credit for stuff like that. And then Santana would do anything. And not only that, one of the most memorable tag matches in the pandemic era of AEW, that street fight with Best Friends was legit. That was as good as good. The Surrounded by Cars, they set it up like a video game arena. And people didn't even notice that. They set it up like an old school video game, like, oh, you get to do the back lot brawl. That's what they set it up like for the street fight. It was brilliant. The way that they pulled that off with no fans in the arena. And they deserve a lot of credit for that. And to not be able to capitalize on that coming out of the Jericho Appreciation Society, I can't figure out to this day, outside of Santana and Heel Up Man with the knee injury. That was brutal. I know that. But I don't know, how you mess up those two, or it leaks into the faction issue that we've kind of brought up here, leaks into the tag team division. You know what I mean? It trickles all the way down when it comes to that. And it affects singles wrestling as well, but it's easier to kind of work around. Obviously, MJF hasn't had a problem. What's he been in, like 3 factions now? At least. He's been linked to everybody in the roster one time. I mean, he teamed with Wardlow in the last calendar year. That's kind of gnarly to think about. You know what I mean? But either way, that's kind of where, unless you guys, anybody got anything real extra on AEW, let's get into NXT and then let's send them home.
Well,
get the UK guys inside nice and warm. It's raining again outside here soon.
Clark, do you want me to comment on Danielson? Because I have not said anything yet.
Oh, we haven't said a word about Danielson, and I almost just made the biggest botch in Wrestling Republic daily broadcast history and didn't let you comment on Danielson. So the answer is go. Yeah,
it's kind of funny because last week on Throwback, you and I discussed the Don Callis flop. Oh, Hangman hit him. And I remember saying to you that I wondered whether or not, obviously, the Hangman possibly rejoining with the Elite, which in theory would make the whole group a face. And I said to you, I wonder if Don Callis is now going to lead Combat Club because they've gotten more aggressive and darker, way more than they were when Regal was the manager of them. And I said to you, I don't know where Danielson falls with this because whether he's a member, whether he's not a member, Combat Club's been a very weird stable in the sense that they don't always help each other, which is the complete opposite of what a stable's supposed to be. But I kind of wonder whether or not it's going to get revealed that Don is now the new invisible hand behind the Combat Club, and for him to lead them against the Elite, probably leading to a blood and guts match. That's kind of where where my head is thinking that maybe that's where it's going. AEW does have a problem, like you guys were saying, whether it's single stars or groups. They'll put them on TV for a little piece of time, build some momentum, and then they'll just disappear, or it'll just drop, and then you don't see them forever. We've talked about them multiple times. Nyla Rose is a perfect example. She's gone.
So good.
she's gone in catering, and then they'll pull her out every 6 months, have her in a major storyline. She doesn't win, and then she goes back to catering. The Dark Order, another perfect example. You never see the Dark Order.
Best friends. We're hot. We can list them all.
What? But we haven't seen them forever and a day. So you bring in Dark Order. All of a sudden, they're back on Dynamite. And now they're going to get pushed aside because Hangman's going to get together with his real friends. And they'll be gone. So whether they're in catering or Ring of Honor or they just get let go, that's a major problem. I mean, all companies have this problem, but AEW especially, where they'll put somebody on TV and then you won't see them for months. And it's well, why isn't this person getting over? Because no one sees them. You're seeing the same people every week. And that's why you can't get anybody else over, because you're putting them on programming like Rampage or Dark or Elevation. And I hate to say this, no one's watching them. So you're down to just Dynamite, really. Realistically, you're down to 2 hours that's the majority of your audience watches. So you got to be a little bit more careful on how many people you put on TV. And that's been a problem where AEW has a deep roster, but too deep for the amount of content they're able to produce that people care about. That's the problem.
I would agree, but I also think too deep of a roster is too good of a problem to have, and we kind of overlook that. And I'm not trying to argue with you there, but I'm a little bit also look, you can, if you're given proper leadership and booking here, you can set it up in a way where there's a hierarchy established on who performs the best, which is probably how it should work. Who gets the most over should be rewarded. They did a good job with that with the Acclaimed. Tony's proven he can do it in spots. I think it's been a trial and error thing more, and I don't want to oversimplify it on that.
The only thing, Clark, and this is the only thing I want to say is, I don't think having a deep roster is a problem, but they have a situation where, yes, they have all these hours of TV or online content, but if a large portion of the audience is not watching it, it's almost like not having that space to show these things, because if no one's watching it, having a deep roster really doesn't help you in that situation. You know what I mean? That would be my only concern.
No worries. I'm so sorry for that cough again. By the way, I actually tried to mute it too. Is the worst part. I don't know what happened there, but and I wasn't even trying to say honestly that you were accusing them of it being that's the crux of the problem. Yeah. But my point was more there is a way to, for example, in hindsight, and this is, and we can do this now. Now we're about to blow off Kobe's favorite topics, NXT, which I do not want to do, and we will get to for at least the last 10 minutes. But I do want to say this is that the Attitude Era is the most bloated roster ever.
Oh yeah.
And also the 83 weeks WCW era roster is probably the second most bloated roster ever.
I think WCW had 300 people under contract at one time.
Well, and I'm even talking from a star power perspective. I'm not even talking number of. I'm not talking quantity. I'm talking quality even, right? And I guess I would say, while both of those eras presented problems locker room wise, which is I find funny. It's so we can look at history, and if you put a bunch of guys and girls that know they're good and know if given the exact opportunity or the right opportunity or given the spotlight long enough that they can do it, all in the same locker room and go start picking who's going to win and lose, that's going to cause problems no matter where you are.
They always be number one.
That's the nature of competition.
Yeah.
Now, there's a way to navigate this and make sure that it doesn't necessarily leak through some of the ways it has. There's also a way, though, to play off of it leaking through. We've seen that to failure. Vince Russo, WCW, with Hogan and the Jarrett situation. We've seen it to success. We've seen it.
Matt Hardy against Edge, Shawn Michaels against Brett,
Brian
Becky,
Pillman,
Charlotte.
Booker Man.
Oh, yeah.
Booker Man.
Kevin
it
Sullivan.
made Brian Pillman. It
the
made
loose cannon.
Brian Pillman.
The loose cannon. Yes.
Literally, it made the loose cannon. Brian, right? But I mean, that's the most iconic. Booker Man. And you're telling me that they walked back and shook hands in the locker room after that? I don't think so.
Sullivan didn't even know until after the promo.
Not Heenan any less. And so there's precedent set, you know? And there's ways where, and then I point to always my favorite is then they go, well, not in WWE. Well, how about Matt Hardy Edge?
Lita.
Right? Yeah, and Lita. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Add Lita to the conversation there too.
Yes.
Obviously, it was an important piece of that. But I mean,
it was a triangle.
Matt Hardy lost his job and got it back because he was willing to work with somebody who you're telling me he didn't hate Edge after that real life voicemail? He did.
But he loved the money more.
Yeah, he figured out how to work with them, and they made magic. They made magic. And that's the thing is, and even given the recent interview with Moxley on the sessions, which I loved, and Renee does an amazing job hosting that show, and I love Moxley too. Like, I think that interview was so telling. It was so cool. But at the same time, it sounded a little bit like Mox was working to me because I don't think Mox is that petty at all. I think Mox isn't saying that the locker room is that beat up. For if he was that upset, he wouldn't be super sticking with AEW the way he is, kind of, right? Like, I think that was a lot of kayfabe there, and I would love to see AEW if they bring some kayfabe back on us. That's the move. That's something that I could get behind for sure. I think that's how you turn it around. But I've gone on too long on my stupid monologue. Kobe, I'm actually going to let you set up NXT for us. You are a resident NXT expert. Give us your two you want to talk about, and we'll squeeze this puppy in.
Well, I mean, even then, I did have another talk. I guess not another tangent, but another.
Don't follow up. We'll do it tomorrow. Sit on it, fans.
Okay, we can.
Sorry.
Okay, we can. So, I mean, not a lot of things are being talked about surrounding NXT Stand and Deliver. And I do want to say personally, I think this is one of the most stacked shows they've ever had. And I guess there's two kind of, I don't want to say blockbuster, but there are two top matches that is almost telling and would be very much interesting to address. So one, I'm gonna do that after, but we're gonna do the unsanctioned match between Grayson Waller and Johnny Gargano. And think about what you want with the situation of NXT. NXT kind of being that they're now in that middle ground between what they were kind of trying to do at 2.0 and Black and Gold. They are kind of in that middle ground and just finding that overall medium. And right now, I think this is, I don't want to say this is very telling, but this is a very awesome opportunity. And we have Johnny Gargano back in NXT, finishing the story, if you will, with Grayson Waller, who had taken him out of NXT, or who was the one to attack him before he had his hiatus from the entire company in general. So overall, I just kind of want to know like some thoughts. I like what they're doing, and they're really making this seem like a very personal rivalry, and I think it is very much working between the two of them.
So I hear where you're coming from. I'm not gonna lie. I have not watched a lot of NXT of late because I also disagree with some of the things that you said about the entertainment value. Gargano's return, I think, is kind of the biggest news, and it didn't really move me much. It felt more like a send down. It felt like Jose Reyes at the end of the Mets run, where it's like, man, this guy won a couple MVPs. He's such a stud. It was like, give him that AAA send down. And it felt like a downgrade. Now, the Waller rivalry specifically, I've found entertaining on Waller's end of the microphone. But I feel like Johnny's got to get his groove back, and it's not Johnny's fault. He's just been put in funky spots. It doesn't make sense to me. where they're putting Johnny. Johnny's entertainment value lies in his ability to tell a longer story, and not only that, it's the clever lines along the way. Johnny was on the wrong end of too many clever Grayson Waller lines in this one for me. I mean, we're talking about Mr. Takeover, and it just hasn't. That story hasn't been told. This should be insurmountable for Waller. This is one of the few times where the baby should look like the badass. And I have personally, and I'm not trying to fully disagree with you, Kobe. You watch more NXT than me, and you would know better. But it just feels like in the hype that I'm watching, it feels like Waller is fighting weirdly like from over, and Gargano's fighting from underneath, but not in a way where it's like, are we going to get the old Gargano back or no? It's like, no, we've got this more like, he's like, it's almost like it's assumed that we already know his NXT status. And yes, while us three on this show do, everybody doesn't. And I feel like that hasn't been leaned into enough. Anthony, do you have thoughts on kind of that dynamic at all? I don't know. Do I sound crazy on that?
No, here's the thing with the Gargano Waller one, which to me is really the match that I'm most interested on this card. I'm a Gargano fan. I've said this before. I am okay with Gargano going back to finish off this Waller thing because that's what got him out of NXT during his hiatus. So I'm okay with him finishing it, and I prefer him to at least be in a high-profile match WrestleMania weekend than not to appear at all or to be thrown in the Andre bullshit battle royal that no one cares about. I think Johnny really showcased himself in the chamber along with everyone else that was in that U.S. title
true.
one. I think this can absolutely showcase Johnny, and I think we know what he can do in an unsanctioned match, what he did with Ciampa and what he did with, I believe, Adam Cole. I think he did an unsanctioned with him as well, or something similar to it. But
no, it was two out of 3 falls in a single match.
Well, anyway, it's interesting with Waller and Gargano because it's almost like it's two versions of Shawn Michaels facing each other. Waller representing the version of Shawn from '97 that everyone hated backstage, and Gargano being, he's essentially Shawn and Hunter's kid. Like, they love him, and he's like the best of Shawn that people actually love. So it's yeah. I think that is probably the show stealer on that card. That's the one that every other match on paper has to beat. And that says something when you have a ladder match on the show.
You have a ladder match. You have a 5-way.
I still think this is the match. If I had to pick one match, this is it. I know what Johnny can do on the big stage. I saw him at Philly TakeOver with Andrade, and I will argue that was Andrade's best match he's ever had in his life.
Yes.
And I don't think he's ever had one better. This one I really enjoy. Johnny can't stay in NXT. This has to be the end, but this needs to be the launching pad that post-Mania, you got to do something with Johnny.
Like a real main roster run is kind of what I was trying to get at. I fumbled there in the middle, but like that's kind of what I was trying to get at was this needs to turn into
the actual.
Because I actually was entertained by the little bits he did with Miz. It turned into nothing though. And it didn't feel like much once it was paid off between Miz and Loomis. It wasn't. It wasn't Johnny. It was Johnny played too big a role there.
And then even Gargano and Austin Theory kind of went nowhere either when he first started it on the main roster when he returned.
Well, keep in mind, they had that match. The season premiere of Raw in Brooklyn. They had that match, but fine, like you're saying, like you're saying, you're shaking your head, and it's like they had the match, but it is very much an afterthought. And I do kind of want to. I don't want to say have my chance to rebuttal, but you got
3 minutes by the way until the Eagles land, and that's when we're going home. So you got 3 minutes. We're going 47.
Okay,
so you're giving them a 3-minute warning.
Yeah, 3-minute warning.
But Anthony did it best, or said it best. Grayson Waller versus Johnny Gargano has the potential to steal the show. There's a lot of matches that can. Breaker and Mello have to live up. We have that 5-way that is really anyone's game. NXT has a lot of stuff, but like he said, Gargano and Waller have to have the time, have to have the ability to tell the story, because the story is Johnny Gargano, despite being Mr. Takeover, he is still defending NXT and defending the fact that this is where people come into their own, and people like Grayson Waller are going to come into the brand and think, well, I'm better than that. I'm bigger than that. Why am I here at the end of the day? People are going to say that. And Gargano's almost in a fact that he is working under, as he is trying to defend something that, one, he loves very dearly. Triple H loves very dearly. Shawn Michaels loves very dearly. And everyone else does as well in this case.
That makes sense. And I hear you. And I'll personally say I think that Breaker and Mello need to steal the show. And I do think it's kind of that one is actually booked perfectly, in the sense that it's Braun's send off to Raw.
Should be.
And it's Mello's chance to carry that world title gold in NXT. And while it's not quite the WWE title or anything else of that nature, it's big enough. It's big enough. And it's the first step in the right direction for him too. I think it's kind of serendipitous and the perfect timing. We have a few comments. My mom shouting you guys out for being in the house, but then also breaking news. That'd be really cool if we had music. Plane has landed and is taxiing to the terminal. So on that note, I'd like to welcome Ben Allison, Ben Loughran Soul, and Robert Chaos to America. We're going to sign off till tomorrow. We'll let you know what time we're going on. We're going to let you know pretty much everything all weekend. We're going to have vlogs. We're going to have the whole nine. We've got multiple podcasts going up. It'll be content every day. ROH Friday. We're doing it all. But on that note, anything else from you guys? Because we're signing off. It's been a fun one. The first ever all West Coast Wrestling Republic daily broadcast.
It is.
And that's it, guys. Everyone have a good one. We'll see you tomorrow morning, probably.